sister group of the bilaterians, these guys would be monophyletic. Certainly the groups that you looked at, like Turbellaria, Trematota, and Cestota, together would still be part of Platyhelminths as a monophyletic group. So these guys are bilaterians. They're all bilaterally symmetrical. They have spiral cleavage. You know what that means, right? What does spiral cleavage mean? It means what? That's a,
The anus is developed.
no, that means that they are, it's actually the mouth develops first in these guys. That would be that they're protostome. The last before becomes the mouth. How about, try again. What does spiral cleavage mean?
Sulfates are
The cell fates are established on the first division of the zygote, right? Such that there really is no chance of having like identical twins. And this, remember, there's a couple different types of determinate cleavage patterns we're going to look at. These guys happen to have the one that's referred to as spiral, as well as who else is going to have spiral cleavage? Do you know for us? Could be mollusks, which we're going to do in a little bit, and annelids, right? So the other Lophococozoans, the guys that we looked at this week, are going to be described as having spiral determinate cleavage. They're triploblastic. What does that mean? There's 3 germ layers, right? So they have endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm, right? And in platyhelminths, the mesoderm is not differentiated. It's typically referred to as mesenchyme, right? And with respect to the digestive tract, right, they have either a blind gut, right, or in the case of the tapeworms, they have no digestive tract at all, because of course they live floating in digested food, so they just absorb food through their skin, right? And there's no secondary body cavity. There's no pseudocoel. There's no schistocele, intracoel. There's nothing that would resemble a coelom in these guys at all. They tend to have really good regenerative ability. Did you notice on like some of those little Dugessia they showed like cutting with a razor blade to get 2 heads or whatever, because they have very, very simple tissues and very simple body plans, so that they tend to regenerate body parts really well. They're mostly hermaphroditic. So for the vast majority of them, they're hermaphroditic. As far as I know, all of the planarians are hermaphroditic, and the tapeworms are too. And if you look at, for example, like the liver flukes, like that Clinorchus, I don't know, did any of you look at those liver flukes? There were a couple in a little while. This is the lab before spring break, the last lab before spring break. They're hermaphroditic. But in some of the flukes, like in the schistosomes, the blood flukes, they're separate sexes. I'm going to show you a movie on this in just a second, and then you'll remember this forever, because you'll see the little male worm and the female worm copulating in the bloodstream. So you'll remember forever that these guys are separate sexes. But I always kind of confuse myself and think that schistosomes are nematodes, because nematodes are mostly separate sexes with only a few that are hermaphroditic. But these guys are sort of the exception as being separate sexes for flatworms. Most flatworms are hermaphroditic. This also brings up a rather interesting thing. The other little movie, so I'm going to show you one movie that shows the different larval stages and the infectious aspect of schistosomes or blood flukes. The other movie I'm going to show you has to do with these beautiful flatworms called Spanish dancers. And they have these beautiful colors and these ruffling edges when they swim. It ends up that they're hermaphrodites, right? They have both male and female gonads. So when they mate, it creates sort of this interesting dilemma. Like if you're going to choose a partner and have kids, you probably know whether you're going to be the dad or the mom, right? You have a pretty good feel for that? Like when you picture having kids, you kind of know which role you'll probably play. That's because we're separate sexes. But notice if you could be either one, right, then you sort of have to decide who's going to be which role. Which role do you think is better? If you could pick, right? If you could be either mom or dad, which one do you think is actually the better role for you to play? Remember, the goal is to get your genes into the next generation with as little expenditure of time and energy as possible.
Dad.
Yeah, notice all of a sudden it was dad, right? You guys are going to see sperm's not worth much, right? A single male could go out and impregnate 100 females, right? Females are typically, in most animals, are the ones that produce the really energy-rich gametes. They're the ones that tend to take care of the offspring, right? It's hard to be mom. It's really hard to be mom. So these worms, when they're going to try to figure out who's mom and who's dad, are basically going to have a little fight in order to figure out who gets to be the dad. Because being the dad is actually the much easier role, right? This fighting that they do is called penis fencing. Do y'all know what fencing is? Like when you get swords, you go sword fighting. So you can kind of envision, are you all excited? You're going to see a movie with 2 worms and penis fencing in a minute. Very cool. And it would not happen were they not hermaphroditic, because there'd be no question as to who was going to play the male and female role. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, these are polyphyletic if aceals are included, but most people would pull aceals out now as a potential sister group to all the other bilaterians. And so the remaining platyhelminths, whereas before they would have been thought to be sort of these primitive or basal animals because bilaterally symmetrical animals because they have only one opening to their digestive tract and they don't have a coelom. They're really good protostome animals. They're Lophotrochozoans. They're related to things like mollusks and annelids. And the fact that they have spiral cleavage is sort of a good indication of that, right? That they have the same type of determinate cleavage that you see in derived groups like mollusks and annelids. So a lot of these traits that we've interpreted as being simple, well, I mean, they are simple, but that we've interpreted as being ancestral are actually a simplification, or the simple aspect to them is a derived condition, not the ancestral condition. Okay, so there's four sort of classes, right? If it's the phylum Platyhelminthes, we can divide it into classes. There's four classes here, but really we're not going to talk about the monogeneans. They're parasites in fish, and we're going to kind of leave those alone. So these are the three that we looked at in lab that I really want you to know. So Turbellaria are the free-living ones. Things like Dugassia, you all have a picture in your head when I say Dugassia, right? Are you picturing him? He was so cute. He was crawling along, eating egg yolk, had two little eyes on top of his head looking at you, right? And then there also are freshwater, well, there's a lot of freshwater, and there's also an awful lot of marine turbellarian flatworms or planarians. There also are a lot of terrestrial ones. I'll show you a picture of one that has kind of like a shovel-shaped head, and it looks kind of weird, and they crawl around on land, so they're not just aquatic. Trematodes and cestodes are all parasites, right? So Trematoda are flukes, liver flukes, blood flukes, right? And you'll see that these parasites, both trematodes and cestodes, have complex life histories where they have multiple different hosts. So trematodes, you'll see, usually spend part of their life in some larval form in a snail. And tapeworms tend to spend part of their life in a larval stage inside of a crustacean of some kind. And I'll show you pictures of this in a second. And the movie I've got to show you is going to show you in real detail exactly how this works. Yeah, so these are flukes and these are tapeworms. Yeah. So this gives you a little idea of Turbellaria, or the planarians. This one's on somebody's hand. See how it's got this beautiful little shovel-shaped head? And it's terrestrial. It lives out on land running around, right? This gives you an idea as to what some of the really beautiful marine flatworms look like. This is like one of the ones that they would call a Spanish dancer, right? Because you see it has those ruffles, and you'll see when it swims in the movie, it's gorgeous. And then this would be like the little guy that you have to know by name, right? Dugassia. They have this pharynx with a single opening to the digestive tract, so technically it's a blind gut. But if you look at the gastrovascular cavity, you'll notice you have this anterior branch, these two posterior branches, and all of these diverticuli. It really functions not only as a gastrovascular cavity, but also really as a circulatory system. They don't have a real circulatory system. So this highly branched gut is really taking nutrients to all different cells close enough so that nutrients can just go from that point by simple diffusion across all of the body of the animal. So if you start to look at it, you start to look at this and go, wow, this really isn't primitive looking. It's a really advanced looking gut, right? I mean, your gut's rather simple. You just go kind of like mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, anus. It's just basically a tube, right? It's not very interesting. This is really highly branched and much more elaborate. So this interpretation of this as sort of a primitive or an ancestral condition just because it has only one opening is probably not right. In fact, if this is really a protostome animal, which in all likelihood it is, it's nested up inside of other protostome animals, probably this is descended from something that had a one-way digestive tract and it just kind of lost its aim. And in the case of the tapeworms, they lost everything, right? Because they didn't need it. So it's a reduction or a simplification, but those actually represent a derived condition and not the not in some kind of an ancestral position here. This shows you a liver fluke. So here I think this is the deer's liver with a beautiful little fluke right here. These are hermaphroditic. We had prepared slides with whole liver flukes on them. I don't know what these, did you see those in the lab? There were a couple little ones in the jar. A lot of these flukes cause a distended abdomen like this in people that are infected. This shows the life history that I'm going to show you in the movie. Notice this is a blood fluke, so this is a schistosome. And you'll notice that these actually have separate sexes. This is the only example of a platyhelminth that has separate sexes. The male's a lot smaller than the female, and they live right in the bloodstream, and they produce just zillions of eggs, and you'll see it in the movie. There's a couple different types of larvae. This is in your lab manual, right? This is a Miracidium. It's a ciliated larva, and I'll point this out to you in the movie. This has to infect a snail. It can't infect a person. It has to infect a snail. And when it's inside of the snail host is when it metamorphoses into this larval stage called a cercaria. And the cercaria then can burrow right through the skin and go into the bloodstream. The movie I'm going to show you is called Cell Wars, and it's about 20 years old. You'll see I taped it off of television. It's actually about how vaccines are developed and how the immune system works. really a very good little series. So they talk about like how the flu vaccine, why you need a different flu vaccine every year, and how it changes, and how the flu virus evolves. The part on this really focuses on development of a vaccine against schistosomiasis. And of course, you guys probably know sort of how your immune system works. You know that if you have like a bacterium or virus or something like that comes into your body, that your immune system immediately starts, it recognizes those antigens on that virus or that bacteria as not being part of you, and it immediately starts trying to figure out how to get rid of them, right? How to produce antibodies that are going to attack those foreign antigens and destroy them. So this little worm, you'll see that these adult worms, they live right in the bloodstream. And you'll see in the movie, they talk about a worm can live in there for like 20 years, in your blood. One worm. And so the question is, how does it do that? I mean, your immune system should be all over that, right? The reason you get sick from a virus or a bacterium is because it takes your body a while to figure out how to produce the antibodies against that antigen and destroy it. But it doesn't take 20 years, right? So how is this worm getting away with that? How is it getting away with living right in the middle of your bloodstream for 20 years without your body attacking it and killing it? That's kind of amazing. So here you're sitting there thinking, oh wow, it's just a little worm. This is an incredibly smart little worm, right? And so the movie talks about how you might go about developing a vaccine against this disease called schistosomiasis. And I should point out, a lot of people think, oh wow, you know, I want to be in medicine. Why do I have to take Bio 2 and learn about like worms and snails and stuff? The way that they come up with ideas as to how to approach a vaccine is by understanding the biology of the worm and by understanding these different life history stages and the different hosts they have. So an understanding of the worm itself is very important in figuring out how you're going to treat the disease. This shows you a liver fluke. So you'll notice it has both a male and female, right? It's hermaphroditic. It also has a myristidium and a cercaria stage. It goes through another stage called a redia. This picture I put in your lab manual, right? You all remember this in your lab manual? Each larval stage is actually capable of copying itself and making clonal copies. It's called polyembryony. So you can have, from a single fertilized egg, you could actually end up with lots and lots of individuals that are all clones of one another as they go from one larval stage to the next. And in the case of a liver fluke, there's actually even a third host, which is a fish. So the myristidium infects a snail, metamorphoses into this redia and a cercaria, which infects the fish and insists into these metacercaria in the flesh. And this one, rather than burrowing through the skin, it actually has to be ingested. So like if you eat undercooked fish, this is kind of the trouble.
So yeah, my brother and I, we went bass fishing in the creek and we caught a crap load of bass. And it was in the summertime, and they were all filled with like these little tiny yellow worms, and they had like a case around them.
So when we do the last, yeah,
What kind of worms were those?
there's probably these. So when we
Go
get,
through a snail in order to get it?
yeah, and so there have actually been programs where that's so funny that you'd say that, because you realize in the last lab that we're going to do, you're going to do a whole computer modeling of an ecosystem, and one part of it is based on an actual true story where they had this exact situation where they had these bass with all these, that were infected with all these flukes, right? And so they wanted to get rid of the flukes, and the strategy was, we're going to get rid of the snails, because if we could get rid of the snails, the flukes would not be able to complete their life history, and we would be able to get rid of the flukes out of the bass. And so the way they decided to get rid of the snails was they brought all of these black carp in and let them go. You know what carp are? They're these big bony fish that love to chow down on the snails. The problem is it doesn't work, and it's because they didn't take into account the complexity of the food web in that particular lake. But we're going to model that exact thing, and there's a paper in the lab supplements on that, introducing the black carp into this pond. It's based on a true story.
Are they harmful?
And it's tied right back to this. So remember this when we get to that, because that's going to be like about 3 weeks from now.
If you eat them, are they harmful?
Well, if they're insisted, you want to cook them. If you cook them really well and their dad do it, they're fine.
Yeah,
But
because my brother was like
it may
cooking
be
and
kinda
eating,
gross,
I'm like,
but-
I don't know if I'm going to eat that.
Yeah, as long as you cooked it very well, but you definitely wouldn't want to eat them. I don't know whether they're exactly this type because I study mushrooms, but typically you don't want to eat like fish that's crawling with worms. That's probably not a good thing.
Yeah, I read an article
You
that
want it
you're
to be
not
pretty well
supposed
cooked.
to eat anything.
And of course, pork you worry about too. What do you worry about getting with pork? Trichinosis. But trichinosis you'll see is trichinella, which is a nematode. So we're going to look at that one, but it's not this. It's in a different phylum than this, right? It's not a phylum.
I heard that you can use tapeworm to like treat like not flu symptoms, allergy symptoms.
Really?
Yeah.
That's not what I thought.
So they sell it. They sell it online for
You
that.
like take a tapeworm?
Take a tapeworm and then it somehow it relieves your allergy
Well, I've heard
symptoms.
of people take, why, that's not what I thought you were gonna say, why would somebody intentionally infect themselves with a tapeworm?
Apparently
Lose weight.
Yeah,
weight
to lose
loss
weight.
or
Yeah.
or apparently allergies too.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, see, those I haven't heard, but I would.
Yeah, I'll
I
bring it
I
to
would find it, that'd be
Yeah.
an interesting thing to see, but lose weight, what you're saying,
Like
right?
extreme cases of allergies.
Yeah,
So
this is that's not a recommended way of losing weight, but people do actually purposely infect themselves with tapeworms, because you will lose weight, you're basically keeping somebody else alive, right? You've got a little thing inside of you that you're keeping alive, so this shows a tapeworm coming out of a goat. I have pictures of them coming out of people too, but I thought I'd spare you that. So you know, this is the end, do you remember the end of a tapeworm, what this is called? With these beautiful hooks, these suckers. We're supposed to have drawn this in the lab. Scolex, a scolex, right? That he uses to hang onto the intestinal wall, and it's made up of these little segments called problotids that have both ovaries and testes in each one. So, and it's very good at like fragmenting and producing new little parts of tapeworms. And as I mentioned, the tapeworm, let's see, so that just shows the scolex again with the hooks and the suckers and the problotids. The tapeworm also has a complex life history with a whole bunch of different larval stages, but notice that the intermediates tend to be things like crustaceans. So rather than snails, they have like little crustaceans. They're the happy little tapeworm living inside of a bear there. Okay, so let's try this. So asexual reproduction and good regenerative ability is common in cnidarians and flatworms, most likely due to the fact that they what? Are primitive, lack true tissues, have relatively simple bodies without complex organs or systems, or all of those. Why are cnidarians and flatworms able to reproduce asexually and regenerate their body parts really well? Is it because they're primitive, because they lack true tissues, because they have relatively simple bodies without complex organs or systems, or all of them? Okay, is that everybody something?
you can't do it. You're not in this class.
Mine is putting numbers. Shut up.
Yeah, isn't that funny? See, that's what they say over here. They never say that in the other room. It is this room. It's not. It's so weird. Okay, are we all there now? Nathan?
Yeah.
Going once, going twice? No? Guys, let's see. Okay, most of you got it right. They don't lack true tissues, right? Only sponges lack true tissues. Cnidarians and platyhelminths definitely have true tissues, right? And they're not primitive, especially platyhelminths are a derived group right there up within the lower trophozoa. But they do have relatively simple body plans, right, which allows them to regenerate well. So what would be a good example of a protostome animal? A jellyfish, a tapeworm, a coral, or a sponge? Hopefully, when you look at each one of those animals, you can put it into a phylum. Can you do that? Like a jellyfish is in what phylum? Yeah, we already covered this in lab. About a cnidarian. Tapeworms in what phylum? I just did it. Platyhelminths and corals in what phylum? Cnidaria, and a sponge is in what phylum the way we're doing it? Porifera, right? So the question would be, which one of those phyla belongs to the group of animals, animal phyla that we recognize as protostomes? How many did we have last time? Is that it? 17? Forgot now. 19.
They had just figured out the solution. You gotta point it at it.
You mean mean that it won't go back and forth?
I just.
Oh, then you mean it goes on? Okay,
Yeah.
that's good.
Do your other classes?
We still got about another 3 or 4 weeks before the end of the semester. Figured it out now.
It shouldn't matter. It's just radio wave. It shouldn't matter
Yeah.
if you
Were
point
What
it.
it does, if I
The
see-
receiver's over here, actually.
But it
You're
should be.
pointing it up at that thing, but there's really nothing there.
Oh.
The receiver's
Well,
back there.
pointing up in general, I think works better than just
Oh,
sitting over
maybe.
here.
Yeah, maybe.
Do your other classes complain about it or not?
I don't know. What do you think, Maureen?
I'm teaching the
Not
other,
as much.
I'm teaching the other.
Bigger.
class.
Yeah,
It's in here.
it's here.
Yeah, no, it's this room.
You need to like hit the receivers.
I don't know.
Why
Yeah, I
you
might
not
not have
the
to
other
go
class?
receiver. Okay, where is the last person?
What?
Is there one more person?
No. Look at
Everybody's
you.
numbers lit up? Pick an answer. Okay, I'm gonna end it. Everybody's numbers lit up, seriously? I thought there were 19.
Mine's not lit up?
You are 19.
I'm blind.
Okay, there we go.
See, there you go, you got a point.
Okay, here we go. Yay, most of you got it right? Lighting helmets would be protostomes. Nigerians branched off before protostomes. Nigerians are not bilaterians, so they're not. Protostome is a group of bilaterian. Of course, sponges are out before that even, right? Okay, so ready to watch a movie? Let's see if I can actually get the movie to work fine.